Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a subject that's incredibly complex, morally challenging, and frankly, often overwhelming. We're doing a deep dive into what some historians, notably Hannah Arendt, called the darkest chapter of the Holocaust.
That's right. We're talking about the role of the Jewish councils, the Judenräte.
And this isn't just history, is it? It quickly gets into really deep ethical waters.
Absolutely. And for you listening, the context is key here. A lot of this intense debate really kicked off because of Hannah Arendt's reporting on the Adolf Eichmann trial back in '63. Our mission today, really, is to get a handle on how these councils actually worked.
The Judenräte.
Yes, the Judenräte. And also understand why Arendt's take on their role was so explosive and controversial at the time.
It feels like the core of it is this just impossible dilemma. You have established Jewish community leaders, right? And the Nazis basically forced them into governing their own people.
Exactly.
It's like a choice between having some tiny shred of control or just complete, immediate chaos.
That's the crux of it. So just to summarize, these Jewish councils, or Judenräte, they were basically administrative bodies. The Nazis set them up in the occupied areas, especially in the ghettos in Poland.
And their job description was horrifyingly broad.
You could say that. They weren't just figureheads. They were tasked with running pretty much the whole civic infrastructure inside the ghettos. We're talking social services, hospitals, schools, such as they were.
Rations, too.
Distributing rations, collecting taxes the Nazis demanded, assigning people to forced labor, and eventually the deportation lists.
Right. And from the Nazi perspective, having these councils in place was actually efficient for
No, absolutely crucial. Eichmann himself said the cooperation of Jewish leaders was the very cornerstone of the whole operation.
Really. He used that word.
Yes. Whether it was the early stage, forcing Jews out of Vienna, the forced emigration phase, or later during the mass murder phase, it just made sense for the Nazis.
How so?
Well, it meant the SS didn't have to provide as much manpower. It saved them time, effort. They essentially outsourced the dirty administrative work of destruction to the victims' own leaders.
Which makes the mindset of the council members themselves even more agonizing to think about. They weren't setting out to collaborate and murder, were they?
No, not initially, not in most cases. They were trapped. They operated under this desperate, really tragic logic of saving some.
Try and minimize the damage.
That was the hope, yes. This terrible, desperate hope that if they complied with this order, organizing the labor details, paying the taxes, maybe they could buy some time. Or maybe, just maybe, save thousands by, sacrificing hundreds. Often the non-productive members, as the Nazis termed them.
But that attempt to control the uncontrollable just led them deeper into the machine.
It led to what you could call catastrophic administrative compliance.
Let's unpack that compliance, because that's where you really see the gears of the destruction meshing.
Okay. The sources are chillingly clear on the specifics. The councils had to draw up these incredibly detailed lists of people for deportation.
Names, addresses.
Everything. They had to prepare inventories of Jewish property that was about to be confiscated. And maybe the most horrifying part, they organized and supervised the Jewish ghetto police.
Their own police force.
Yes, who then had to help the SS round people up, enforce curfews, literally load their own neighbors, their own community members onto the trains.
So the Nazis exploited the community's own organizational capacity.
Exactly. It turned mass murder from what could have been a messy, difficult, logistical nightmare for the SS into something.
Yeah.
Well, almost like a streamlined bureaucratic process.
Wow. Okay, so when we look at the individuals forced into these roles, their responses were varied, but always tragic. Let's talk about maybe the most extreme example. Mordechai Chaim Rumkowski in the Udu ghetto.
Rumkowski is. Yeah, he's probably the most infamous case. He was appointed chairman of the Council of Elders in Udu, and he ruled it like a dictator. His whole strategy, his gamble, was survival through production. He truly believed that if he could turn the Udu ghetto into this incredibly efficient production center for the German war effort, making uniforms, boots, whatever they needed, then the Nazis wouldn't liquidate it. They'd need the labor.
And he had a lot of personal power within the ghetto.
Immense power. To the point where he actually issued his own currency for the ghetto and postage stamps, featuring his own portrait.
Seriously?
Yes. People mockingly called him King Chaim. He maintained this iron grip, all in the name of efficiency and production, hoping it would save them.
But that intense focus on production, that whole strategy, it didn't work in the end.
No. It was built on a fundamentally flawed premise about Nazi intentions. The tragic low point came during the Spare Action. The Germans demanded the council hand over the non-productive, the elderly, and heartbreakingly the children.
And Romikowski.
He complied. He gave this infamous speech begging the ghetto residents to give up their children so that the workers, the productive ones, could survive. It's just horrific to contemplate.
And did he survive?
No. Despite everything, when the ghetto was finally liquidated in August 1944, Romikowski and his family were put on one of the last transports to Auschwitz and killed.
What a stark contrast, then, when you look at someone like Adam Czerniakow in the Warsaw Ghetto.
A very different figure. Czerniakow was an engineer, a respected pre-war civic leader in Warsaw. His approach, his response to the horror, reveals a different kind of moral calculation.
He was also forced to implement deportation orders, wasn't he?
Yes, utterly horrific orders. The demand was for 6,000 people per day to be deported to Treblinka, though they were told it was resettlement. His diary details the agony. His last desperate act was pleading to get an exemption for the children in the orphanage.
Including Janusz Korczak's famous orphanage.
Yes, he failed. The Germans wouldn't budge.
And faced with that failure, with signing off on more deportations.
He refused. On July 23, 1942, instead of signing the order, he took cyanide. He left a note. It just said, "I can no longer endure everything." He chose suicide, chose absolute non-compliance rather than participate any further in the destruction.
2 leaders, 2 ghettos, 2 devastatingly different ends. And then there's another layer, not direct cooperation, but the burden of knowing the truth, like with Leo Baeck.
That's another profound ethical dilemma. Leo Baeck, a very prominent rabbi and leader, president of the main German Jewish organization, was imprisoned in Theresienstadt, the supposed model ghetto.
And he knew what was really happening. He knew about the death camps.
The sources suggest he did have knowledge, or at least very strong suspicions, about Auschwitz and the gas chambers, but he made a conscious decision not to tell the other inmates in Theresienstadt what fate likely awaited them.
Why? What was his reasoning?
His rationale, as recorded later, was that living with a certain knowledge, the anticipation of death by gassing, would be an even greater unbearable torment than remaining in ignorance or clinging to some sliver of hope.
Wow. So the duty to inform versus the duty to maybe preserve some measure of peace or hope, however fragile.
Exactly. It just highlights the impossible moral tightrope these figures walked. There were no good choices.
Okay, these stories, Romikowski's authoritarianism, Czerniakow's suicide, Baek's silence, they really set the stage for understanding Hannah Arendt's intervention, don't they? Her analysis of Eichmann himself seems key here.
It's absolutely central. We have to unpack her argument carefully. Arendt, covering the Eichmann trial, famously developed her concept of the banality of evil.
Meaning evil isn't always monstrous and demonic.
Precisely. She argued Eichmann wasn't some foaming-at-the-mouth sadist. He was terrifyingly normal, a bureaucrat. His defining characteristic, she argued, wasn't hatred, but thoughtlessness.
Thoughtlessness.
Yes, a profound inability or refusal to think from the perspective of others, a failure to grasp the reality of his actions. He was just following orders, organizing timetables, ensuring quotas were met. Efficiently.
So the banality is in the routine, the bureaucratic process masking the unprecedented horror.
Exactly. The system relied on people just doing their jobs, fitting into their assigned roles, without stepping back to question the whole enterprise. This ties into a concept one source mentions, shikuteishi.
It means?
It's a Japanese term, roughly translating to thinking stop or a kind of intellectual paralysis. The inability to pause, reflect, and question the system you're part of. Arendt saw Eichmann as the epitome of this.
Okay, so within that framework, evil is bureaucratic, thoughtless routine. Arendt then made her most explosive claim about the Judenräte. What was it specifically?
It was this sentence, really, that caused the uproar. She wrote, and I'm paraphrasing slightly from the sources, if the Jewish people had been totally unorganized, leaderless, yes, there would have been chaos, incredible suffering, but the final death toll likely wouldn't have reached between 4.5 and 6 million.
That's just a staggering assertion. She's suggesting their own organization made the killing more efficient.
That was the direct implication, and why it hit so hard. She argued that the very administrative capacity of the Jewish communities, their ability to compile lists, organize housing, maintain order, even provide the police force the Nazis demanded, essentially made the final solution easier for the Germans to implement on such a massive scale.
The Nazis weaponized the community structure against itself.
That's one way to put it. They exploited the existing infrastructure, the leadership, the sense of order to streamline the process of roundup and deportation.
And is there evidence to back this up? This horrific correlation between cooperation and efficiency?
Well, Arendt and others pointed to the Netherlands as a kind of tragic case study.
What happened there?
The Dutch Jewish Council was known for its, let's say, very thorough cooperation with the initial German demands, registration, segregation, etc. They were meticulous. The devastating result. About 75% of Dutch Jews were deported and murdered.
75%.
Yes, a rate unparalleled in Western Europe. Far higher than in France or Belgium, for instance, where cooperation was less complete or communities were less centrally organized. The implication was that this bureaucratic efficiency, even if born of desperation, tragically facilitated the Nazis' aims.
Understandably, the reaction to Arndt saying this was intense.
Ferocious is probably the word. She was attacked from all sides. Accused of blaming the victims, of letting Eichmann off the hook, even of being a self-hating Jew.
For suggesting this uncomfortable truth about the mechanics of the genocide.
Yes. She challenged the simpler narrative of just passive victims versus purely evil perpetrators. By focusing on the system and the impossible choices forced upon the leaders within that system, she touched a very raw nerve. She always maintained her critique was of the system of totalitarianism and how it implicated everyone, not a condemnation of the Jewish leaders personally.
Okay, so if administrative cooperation, however coerced, tragically greased the wheels of destruction, what about the opposite? What happened when the system encountered resistance, non-cooperation?
That's the crucial counterpoint. The sources show a pretty clear inverse relationship. Where there was determined resistance, especially unified national resistance, the Nazi deportation machine often faltered, sometimes dramatically.
And the prime example here is always Denmark, right?
Denmark is the standout case, absolutely. It's remarkable.
They weren't a military powerhouse, obviously, so what made the difference?
It was a combination of political will and popular morality. The Danish government simply refused Nazi demands to identify Jews or force them to wear the yellow star. They just said no.
Flat out refused.
Yes. And when word leaked out, apparently from a German official himself, that the Nazis were planning a surprise roundup,
What happened?
the Danes reacted almost overnight. The warning spread through the Jewish community, often announced in synagogues, and then ordinary Danish citizens, fishermen, students, neighbors, the police, even parts of the government mobilized to hide Jewish families and then ferry almost all of them, nearly 700-800 people, across the Sound to safety in neutral Sweden.
An entire nation essentially said no.
Pretty much. When the SS conducted their raids, they found very few people left to arrest. Eichmann himself later called the Denmark operation a major failure for his apparatus. It showed that concerted non-compliance could completely derail the plan.
And we see hints of this even in places like France, which had collaborationist government.
Even in Vichy France, yes. Initially, the Vichy regime was quite cooperative in rounding up and deporting foreign Jews living in France, stateless refugees, mostly.
But they drew a line somewhere.
They did. When the Germans pushed further and demanded the deportation of French citizens who were Jewish, the Vichy government, for its own reasons, nationalism, maybe pushback from the public, bureaucratic inertia, refused. They absolutely refused, as one source puts it.
And that refusal mattered.
Significantly. It didn't stop the deportations entirely, sadly, but it slowed the process down considerably. It saved tens of thousands of French Jews. It proved that even a compromised government could obstruct the killing machine if it chose to draw a line.
Which brings it down to the individual level too, doesn't it? The possibility of moral choice, even in the face of overwhelming terror.
And that's maybe best illustrated by that story that came out during the Eichmann trial, the story of Anton Schmidt.
Who was he?
He was a German Wehrmacht sergeant stationed in Poland, not Jewish. But he was appalled by what he saw happening. He actively helped Jewish partisans, gave them forged papers, used army trucks to help them escape. Just extraordinary bravery.
What happened to him?
He was caught and executed by the Nazis in 1942. But when his story was told in the courtroom in Jerusalem, Arendt observed that this profound silence fell over everyone.
Why the silence?
Perhaps because his actions, his simple, decent humanity in the midst of that horror, demonstrated that the excuse "I was just following orders" wasn't absolute. That moral choice, the choice to not participate, to resist, was possible, even for someone inside the German military machine. It was the moment, Arendt felt, where the possibility of individual conscience asserted itself against the narrative of systemic inevitability.
So, if we try to synthesize all this incredibly difficult history, what's the core takeaway for us, for the listener trying to understand the Judenräte and Arendt's critique?
I think it's a deeply sobering lesson about the nature of modern systemic evil. It doesn't always require monsters in the caricature sense. It can thrive on, as Arendt put it, thoughtlessness. That failure to critically engage, to question the system you're embedded in, to see the human consequences of bureaucratic actions.
Like Eichmann, focused only on the efficiency of the trains.
Exactly. His conscience, he claimed, only bothered him when he failed to carry out his orders efficiently. That's the banality.
So the Holocaust, seen through this specific lens, involves these two horrible mechanisms working together. The external Nazi destruction machine fueled by this bureaucratic thoughtlessness.
And tragically, the internal dynamic where the existing structures and leadership of the Jewish communities were manipulated, forced into this impossible situation of administrative cooperation that ultimately aided the process.
While, on the flip side, the examples like Denmark show that determined, unified non-cooperation was perhaps the most effective spanner in the works.
Yes. National and individual moral resistance proved it could disrupt the system.
Which leaves us, I suppose, with a really challenging final thought, especially for us living today in our own complex bureaucratic world.
What's that?
Well, if knowledge, foresight, and that capacity for critical ethical thought are the main defenses against this kind of systemic evil, how do we make sure in our world filled with giant organizations, algorithms, information overload, how do we ensure we don't fall into that trap aren't warned about, that shikotishi, that thinking stop?
How do we avoid becoming Eichmanns, small or large, just doing our jobs without fully reckoning with the consequences?
Exactly. It's a terrifying question this history forces upon us, and maybe one we need to keep asking.